At a party, Gracie witnesses Gray's transformation into a werewolf. This shocking revelation not only changes her perception of Gray, but also deals a massive blow to her worldview. Welcome to the Alpha's Love channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. 22. Gracie. Walking into church on Sunday, the day after my ex-boyfriend became a wolf and all. Yeah, that day, I felt like I had sinned. Like sin sinned. Like not only would I end up in hell, I would be Satan's right-hand man kind of sinned. I had never felt this guilty in my entire life. Not when, in 6th grade, I had held Johnny Kravitz's hand during prayers, not even after I first kissed Gray. But that kiss felt more evil when I knew I was kissing a creature of the dark. Because although it hurt me to think it, that's what Gray was. He was in league with witches, demons, etc., everything I had been raised to detest. But I didn't detest Gray, for some reason, even now that I knew the truth. Guilty as I was, there was nobody for me to talk to. My parents were out of the question, even more so than the priest. And I couldn't tell Scott or Kira, because I didn't feel Gray's secret would be safe with them. And I didn't feel as if I could ask the Lord for forgiveness because he probably wanted to throw me in hell right away. So, I felt even more burdened than I should have been. I took a seat in between my parents and gazed at the large crucifix that hung high above the altar. The dead Christ seemed to be looking straight at me and I quickly looked away. Reverend Potter mounted the altar and began his sermon. And he seemed to be speaking right to me. People of God, I know you've all been reading the papers. A hum of agreement went round. They speak of things, creatures roaming the woods after dark, leaving carcasses for us to find. My breathing stopped. With everything that happened, I never even thought in that direction. The killings in the woods, they said they had been done by wolves. Gray? They call them wolves. But we know what they are. He smiled, letting his eyes run over every single one of us. It might have just been me, but I'm sure they spent an extra second on me. Agents of the devil. Yes, and encouraging hums. I shot up from my seat and every eye in the house turned to me. I looked at my parents and mouthed bathroom, and I was allowed access. I rushed out of the seemingly progressively warm room and greedily gulped the cool air outside. I couldn't continue to live like this. I needed to speak to somebody, anybody. Tamara Wright. I tried to calm myself before turning to the voice. It was a tall, black girl with waves of tightly coiled, kinky hair tamed at the top of her head. Yeah. Hi. I hadn't ever seen her before. How did she know my name? I should get back inside. This town was certainly full of weird people. I brushed past her to the doors of the church. I was at the party yesterday. That stopped me and I turned around. What? My voice was barely a whisper. I was there and I just wanted you to know that if you wanted somebody to talk to, well, I'm here. She smiled, her eyes were kind. Oh? You're one of them. She chuckled. I am, aren't I? She seemed to say that to herself before turning to me. I'm sorry. I'm Danny. I should have led with that. And yeah, I am one of them. I'm Curtis, mate. I remembered Curtis. He was one of the people I'd met the day before. He seemed to be really good friends with Gray. That made me more alert. Did Gray send you? What? No. I go to this church. Now that I actually thought about it, I remembered I had seen her a few times during services. So you saw? She frowned. Saw what? Gray? Yesterday. At the party. What happened? When he became she laughed. When he shifted and became a werewolf. Yeah, that. Shifted. I tested the word. Yeah, I was there. And I can just imagine how you feel right now. Do you want to talk? My car's here. We can go somewhere. I looked back at the claustrophobic church with my parents in it, my parents, who thought I was in the bathroom, and back at her. Sure. Not long after, we were sipping milkshakes in the diner while I told her everything that had happened between Gray and I. She was a pretty good listener, never interrupting. And then Scott took me home. But honestly, I think it'll be best for everyone if Gray and I just forgot we knew each other. I looked at her expectantly, waiting for her to try to convince me otherwise or something. You're probably right, she said. Color me shocked. What? Tamara, I'm a human, a Christian, and I'm mated to a werewolf. I've been where you are. There was that word again, mated. Her eyes widened and she hastily stopped sipping from her cup. You don't know about all that, her. Well, the moon goddess Ma. I cut her off. Too much crazy in 24 hours, you know what? I don't want to know. She shrugged and went back to her straw. I looked at her closely. She was a Christian and she still stayed with her werewolf boyfriend. I opened my mouth to ask her about it, but the bell above the door jingled as somebody walked in. Danny immediately tensed, looking over my shoulder. I didn't have to turn to know who it was had just walked into the diner. I could find him in a pitch-black house, just from the way I felt when he was nearby. I'm so sorry, Tamara. I had no idea he would be here. Do you want to leave? I nodded, not being able to speak. I got up out of the booth only for me to find him blocking my way. I kept my eyes on the ground and whispered, "Excuse me." He didn't move. Gracie. My insides clenched hearing that. His voice was hoarse, as if he'd been shouting for hours or crying. You're in my way. I still didn't look at him. Gra, his voice broke. Gracie, please. Let's just talk. I couldn't handle this. I shoved past him, my body tingling in the places that touched him, and grabbed Danny's hand. I stopped as we walked away and finally looked at his face. I'd never seen him look so bad. His eyes were red and raw, his hair disheveled as if he'd run his hands through it over and over again. We don't have anything to talk about, Gray. We got in Danny's car and drove back to church, not a single word passing between us. The service was over, and standing outside the doors of the church were my parents. Thank you, Danny. Anytime, babe. She smiled. I got out of the car and walked to my parents. They looked calm because we were in public. They met me halfway, and my father grabbed my arm and pulled me to our truck, all the while smiling for the public. When we get home, Tamara, Grace. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. 23, Gracie. Weeks went by after that fateful Sunday with Danny. When we got home that day, I was told to fast and pray for forgiveness, which I did without even thinking about it. I didn't think much about the things I did those days. Since I broke up with Gray, I'd been a hollow shell of my former self. I avoided him at school and everywhere else, not that I went anywhere else apart from school. Scott had literally been my savior, taking care of me and just generally being there for me those past 2 weeks. I hadn't told him why Gray and I broke up, and he didn't ask. Though I didn't feel like my former self, Gray certainly did not look like his. His eyes were perpetually sunken with dark shadows around them. He also had a beard which, though it suited him, I didn't like at all. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, but even if he didn't look that way, I would know because I saw him every night sitting under the tree outside my window. I missed him, my heart literally ached for him. Each time I saw him, it took all in me not to run up and wrap my arms around him. I longed for his touch, for his kisses, to have those gray eyes be the last thing I see every night, but I'm not going into this again. Scott had told me I needed to stop thinking about Gray before I would be able to move on properly. I closed my Bible with a thump when my mum called me down to dinner. My parents knew something was up with me. I saw the little glances they threw at me and then each other every evening. I greeted my father before taking my place at the table. My mother placed the last dish down and then sat opposite me. I bowed my head as she began the prayer. Heavenly Lord, we thank you for today, for providing for us. We thank you that we are not going hungry. We also thank you for Mike's promotion, and we put our move into your hands and... My head snapped up. What? Do not interrupt prayer. He grunted. Normally, that would silence me, but no, what did she just say? We are moving. Again. Honey, my mother began, casting a small glance at my father. Your father got a promotion and it's for the best, really. You've become something else since we moved to this town. No, no, no. No, the word was small, but then I never disagreed with my parents. She sighed. You see, my daughter would not disrespect prayer time like this. Look at how you dress now, how you speak to your parents. This is not the girl I raised. My chair scraped the floor as I stood up. We are moving and that's final, Tamara Grace. Sit down. It was my father this time. I needed to get out of there. I rushed towards the door, ignoring their shouts behind me. I needed air. How could they do this? I was finally settling down, finally had friends. My eyes were blurred with tears as I stumbled out of the house. I walked blindly to the street until I stumbled into something hard. What happened? He growled. Why are you crying? At the sound of his voice, I practically melted into his arms. The tears wouldn't stop coming. Shhhh. Shhhh, Gray whispered as he stroked my hair. I'm here, baby, it's okay. Take me, I whimpered. I felt him moving and then soon after, he lowered me until I felt the smooth car seat beneath me. He got in the driver's seat and started the car. I didn't pay attention to where we were going, I was just glad to be away from them. Soon after, the car slowed down and I finally looked out of the window. He had brought us to our spot at the top of the cliff. It was dark, only lit up by the headlights of Gray's car and the little sliver of moonlight that peeked from behind the dark clouds. I stepped out of the car and shivered a little. It was mid-November and although it never snowed here, the weather was still a bit chilly and in my haste to get out of the house, I hadn't grabbed a jacket. Gray leaned on the hood of his car and I joined him. We stayed like that for a while, just looking over the dark, silent town. We are moving, I eventually said. No, he said. I sighed. Gray, we broke up, and I always knew I would have to leave at some point. This is the longest we've ever spent in any town. You're not going. He moved to stand in front of me. I know you're mad at me. I know I scared you, but these past weeks have been hell for me and that's when I still saw you every day. If you went, it would kill me. His voice broke at the end and tears sprang into my eyes. Why didn't you tell me? I was scared. I was scared you would hate me or worse, be scared of me like you are now. I'm not scared of you. It was true, after that night, I had thought it over, and somehow I knew that he would never hurt me. Gray had only ever treated me with the utmost care. He continued like I hadn't spoken. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Gracie. But, I promise. I'll tell you everything you want to know, no more lies or secrets. Just give me another chance, please. Did I really want to do this? What are you? I'm a werewolf. The interim alpha of my pack. There were so many questions in that one sentence. Why are you the interim alpha? He sighed. My father was the alpha and my brother was supposed to be the next one, but when they died, the pack elders asked me to stand in for a while. A pack like a literal pack of wolves. And you're their leader. Yeah, we live in the house where the party was and yes, I'm their leader. Ryan is my second in command, my beater, and Mace is my third. Wow. I'd been trying to convince myself that somehow Ryan wasn't a werewolf, just because he was one of Gray's best friends, but apparently I'd just been fooling myself. One more question. Who am I? He looked into my eyes. You're my mate, my other half, and if you accept me, you'll be the Luna of my pack, the female leader. You're my everything. My stomach lurched hearing all those things. Mate? Yeah. You know, like soulmates. The moon goddess, she's the one who created werewolves. She made a mate for each werewolf. Each pair of mates was made perfectly and specially for each other. They complete each other. I gulped. And I'm yours. How long have you known? From the first day I met you. It's instant, the connection. You just know. Well, maybe you made a mistake. I can't be your mate. In case you hadn't noticed, I'm very much human. I know, baby. But I can assure you, I didn't make a mistake. Tell me you don't feel drawn to me. Didn't immediately feel drawn to me when you met me. I bit my lip. I couldn't. That's the mate bond. It hurts when I'm away from you for too long. These last few weeks have been hell. But, baby, you were made for me. You're perfect. Please don't go. I sighed. I really didn't want to go either. If I was telling the truth, the thought of being even just one state away from him made me want to throw up. I have nowhere to stay, Gray. I have to go with them. Stay with me. What? Move in with me, Gracie. 24. Gray. I knew what I was asking of her was a lot from her perspective. I was asking her to leave her parents, the people who had raised her, and come and live with me, a guy she'd only known for barely 3 months. But then from my perspective, this was basically a life or death decision. If she went and moved to another town, I didn't know how I'd survive. Werewolves are conditioned to mark their mates immediately they find them, maybe a few days after at the most. It physically hurt to have been with Gracie for this long without marking her. Normally, she'd have gone into heat if she was a werewolf female. Heat so intense that she'd feel that I had to mark her, otherwise she'd die. But Gracie was human, and so, the only thing she felt towards me was an attachment, a strong pull she couldn't explain. If I was miles away from her without her marked, legend says I could lose my mind and go berserk, or I could die. I definitely wouldn't be able to lead my pack. I needed her with me. I knew it was selfish, extremely selfish, but I didn't know what else to do. I didn't think I could tell her all this all at once. I needed to ease her into it, otherwise she'd run away screaming. I looked down into her eyes. What do you say? Will you come and live with me? She averted her eyes and gently moved out of my grasp. Gray, I'm sorry. Her voice wobbled. I can't. They are my parents. Baby. I took a step towards her, but then stopped when she took a step back. Please, just take me home. I stared at her for a while before nodding once, my jaw tight. I opened the door for her and then got in myself. I looked over at her, but she was determinedly staring out the window. So, I started the car and began the short journey through the dark. I could force her to stay, I knew that. I only had to use my alpha voice on her. But I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to ever use that voice on her. I pulled up to the corner before her house and put the car in park before looking at her again. So this is it? She nodded slowly, biting her lip. I quickly looked away before I could start having any thoughts. Then I felt her soft hands on my face, pulling me to look at her. She leaned up and pressed her lips to mine. It was only briefly, and I immediately wanted to drag her home with me. I'll miss you, Gray. And then she was gone. I watched her walk quickly away until she went out of my line of sight. Fucking awesome. Now I'll have to move to wherever she's going. I turned the car around and headed home. I needed to go home and drop my car, and maybe take a quick shower. I didn't exactly smell like daisies since I couldn't even remember the last time I bathed, before coming back to keep watch under her window. Now I sound like a rapist. We still hadn't found the so-called chosen one, and fuck me if I'm leaving my mate unprotected overnight. I pulled up my driveway and parked in my usual spot before heading into the house. Lily was on the sofa in the living room, talking with a girl Jem. Julia. Yeah, Julia. Hi Lils, what are you doing here? She smiled when she saw me and immediately came over to hug me. Gina invited me to spend the night. Gina. Damn, not even close. Even though Lily was a werewolf, she didn't live in the pack house with us. She and her parents had a house in town. Wanna join us? We were just about to watch a movie. Nah, I'm heading back out soon. I went upstairs and stopped at my mum's room first. She hadn't left the place once since that night that we found out about my father's death, and she didn't talk to anyone either. Just lay there either sleeping or staring blankly at the ceiling. Hi Mum. She didn't even try her head in the direction of my voice. I sighed and made sure she was comfortable before heading to my room. I stripped off my clothes and got in the shower. I'd already left Gracie for too long. I washed quickly and hurried out only to stop short when I walk into my room to find Lily in this flimsy little night dress, lying on my bed. I hadn't grabbed a towel, so I went back into my bathroom and got one. I made sure my dick wasn't on full display before going back into the room. Goddess Lils. You can't just walk into a guy's room like that. She giggled before sitting up. The dress she was wearing barely reached her thighs and barely covered her chest. She raised her hands in surrender. I just wanted to chill with you. I've missed you, you know. I felt bad. I hadn't really been a good friend recently. I'm sorry Lils, but not tonight. I've gotta go, she pouted before coming and hugging me. See Moon, just watch a quick movie. The scent hit me before my door opened. The girl in my doorway looked at Lily and then at me and then at Lily, pressed against me, dressed like that while I was wearing nothing but a towel. Her wide eyes met mine before she fled. I flung Lily away before taking off after her. Gracie. 25. Gracie time frame. After Gray dropped her off, I walked away from Gray with mixed feelings. I liked him, but I loved my parents. However, in 2 months, he had treated me better than my parents had all my life. I shook my head as I reached my house. There was no other decision I could make. I was so caught up in my head that I did not notice my father on the front porch until it was too late. I stopped short, realizing that he had probably seen Gray. Get inside, he hissed, looking cautiously at the neighbors' houses. I hung my head and brushed past him into the house. My mother was sitting on the couch, still wearing the same clothes she had on at dinner. I looked towards the table. It had been cleared. I realized they had finished eating before even worrying about their daughter, who had run out into the night. I scoffed and shook my head. What did I expect? My father slammed the door after him and I could swear that the house shook. He came around and stood in front of me, staring me down. Normally, I would be trembling by now, blubbering excuses and apologies. But I wasn't. I watched my father's eyes widen when he realized that. He retreated and sat on the armchair, still looking at me. How long? What in the world was he talking about now? What? How long have you been going around with a boy? How long has my daughter been a slut? His voice grew louder with each word until the last word, that was so loud that even my mother jumped. No matter how strong I was, it still hurt me to hear my own father call me a slut, but I made sure not to let it show. I scoffed instead and chuckled, I'm not a slut, father. I have a boyfriend. There's a difference. My mother's hand flew to her chest and a strangled cry came out. What? A boyfriend, Mom? That's what you call a guy that you like a lot and do stuff with. I paused and gestured at my father. You must not know how to pick them if you ended up with him. My heart beat fast. What was I doing? My mother's wide eyes glistened with tears. Tamara Grace. What has happened to you? Happened to me. I laughed. Happened to me. Everything. Everything you barred and hindered me from doing has happened to me since we moved. These last few months in this town have been the happiest I've ever been. Enough. My father roared and stood up. I will not sit here and be disrespected by a girl who has turned to the world. A boy. That's all it took for you to lose your way. Do you know how much damnation you have brought upon yourself? Upon this family. Shut up, father. That was something I had always wanted to say, but I really didn't think I ever would. My mother gasped again. Do you know how much misery you bring upon this family? You are a bully. A tyrant. My cheek suddenly stung, and my entire body flew backwards. He hit me. My father had done a lot of things to me in the past, but he had never laid a finger on me. He stood there, his fists clenched, breathing hard. Tears sprang to my eyes as I lay on the floor looking up, and the people I called my parents, the people I was willing to give Gray up for. I got up, the tears now streaming down my face, and ran up to my room. I was not losing Gray like this. I picked up my phone from where I'd left it earlier and scrolled through my contact list before clicking on the name I wanted and sending a text. Me, could you come pick me? The reply was almost instantaneous. Where are you? Me, at home, on my way. I put the phone down and dragged the suitcase with the clothes my aunt bought out of my wardrobe and began throwing stuff into it carelessly until it was almost bursting. Then I took my school bag and filled it with my books and school stuff. Lastly, I put my Bible in. My parents did not represent my faith. My phone dinged with a text, I'm here right on time. I zipped up the suitcase, which is a lot harder than it sounds, and slung my school bag over my shoulder. I rolled the suitcase until I got to the top of the stairs and then stopped to figure out how I would get it down. I shrugged and just dragged it down, not bothering to be careful not to damage it. My parents were still in the sitting room when I got down. My mother seemed to be crying while my father was trying to comfort her. I ignored them and headed straight for the door. Where do you think you're going? I paused by the doorway. Enjoy your move. I'll be back for the rest of my stuff. My father sneered. So you're going to live on the streets? Or tell me, how do you expect to survive without your parents? You'll come crawling back tomorrow. I almost felt sorry for how stupid he sounded. I walked out the door and down the porch steps. Scott got down immediately he saw me and came to help me with my bag. Thank you, I said, as we got into his car. He smiled, of course. Where to? I winced. This was the part one was hesitant about. I was kind of hoping you could take me back to where you picked me up on the night of the party. I'm sorry, but I can't find the place on my own. I thought it was my imagination, but his face darkened a bit before he smiled again and said no problem. He put the car in drive and eased forward. Want to tell me why you're crying and why I'm picking you up at 11 p.m.? I liked Scott a lot. We had been friends for a while now, and he was always there when I needed him, but I still felt weird talking about my personal life with him. Just a disagreement with my parents. He hummed. I'm sure he knew there was more to it, but he didn't ask, which I appreciated. We drove for a while as I sagged into my seat as I thought about what I was doing. I'd made the right choice for sure. I couldn't imagine living without Gray, but would I regret it? 26, Gracie, thank you, I said as Scott helped me grab my suitcase from the boot. I know you must have had better things to do, so thank you for coming. He slammed the boot shut and turned to me smiling. Anytime fruits, I smiled back. I had to admit, the nickname was growing on me. If you need a place to stay though, he eyed my suitcase, you know you're always welcome at my place. I knew I just looked crazy. Depressed over a boy 1 week, and going to his house with a suitcase the next. I'll keep that in mind, thank you again. He winked and I watched him get in his car and drive off. I watched until his taillights disappeared before turning to the large house looming over me. He had said other people lived here. Wouldn't it be weird if I just showed up? Oh well, too late. I rolled the suitcase up to the front door and glanced reassuringly at Gray's car parked not far from me. He was here. I knocked but nobody answered, so I decided to just try the handle and the door swung open easily. Okay, first huddle crossed. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. I still remembered my way around from the party and easily found the living room where a brunette was sitting, tapping away at her phone. Her head whipped up before I even opened my mouth, as if she just suddenly felt my presence. Who are you? Okay, right to the point I see. Hi. I'm looking for Gray. She eyed me down, her gaze lingering on my suitcase before bringing her eyes back to my face and popping her gum. Upstairs. West wing. Last door. And she went back to her phone. Okay. I went to the stairs and decided to leave my case at the bottom. I couldn't begin to start lugging it all the way up there. My stomach was in knots as I got to the top of the stairs. This was crazy, right? No sane person moved in with a werewolf they've known for 3 months. West wing. They had wings. Quick flashback to geography class, I figured west was left and headed there. I passed a few doors, but as I was nearing the end of the corridor, there were none until the door at the end that had light streaming from under it. Okay, this was it. Could he have changed his mind? What if he didn't want me here? What would I do? I exhaled loudly and rubbed my palms together. I was twisting the door handle before it even occurred to me to knock. The door was open and it budged easily. Only that I immediately wished it hadn't. Gray was without clothes. Okay, he had a towel around his waist and pressed to his front. Was Lily, his friend? The one he assured me was nothing more than a friend. Dressed in some kind of slutty outfit that left nothing to the imagination. Gray's wide eyes were on me, his mouth open. Tears blurred my vision as I turned and ran back the way I came. Stupid. 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 I felt very stupid. Of course he was with her. My parents had warned me about boys, but I had told myself Gray was different. Now look at me. Gracie. I heard Gray's footsteps pounding behind me before he easily caught up to me and grabbed my arm. I snatched it back as if his touch burned, which it nearly did. Don't touch me. Gracie, please. I can't believe you. I swiped angrily at the tears. I can't believe myself. How stupid could I be? Baby, please. I swear it's not what it looked like. I scoffed. Of course it wasn't. I looked behind him where Lily was coming from. She caught my eye and smirked, her eyes glinting with amusement. Gee bear. She said as she reached us, touching him lightly. We can do it tomorrow. I'll leave you two to talk. I can't believe this. He ignored her and she walked away. Baby, I swear. I swear, nothing happened. I would never. His eyes were wild, afraid. I grabbed his hand and pulled him back to his room. As soon as the door shut, I pushed him against and pressed my lips roughly to his. His arms wrapped around me immediately. I let my hand run over his chest, just a mass of muscles, exploring until I stopped and pulled away, pushing him back. His eyes were dark and we were both panting. Baby, he was confused. I trust you. I know that nothing happened between you and her, but I am mad that you put yourself in a position where something could have happened. I don't like that at all, and you will have to do some serious groveling. Now go and get my suitcase from the bottom of the stairs. I need to get changed and get to bed. Today has been one hell of a day. I put my hands on my waist, waiting for him. Ho what? He stumbled through his words. I'm not moving with my parents. I said. His face went from confused to shocked until a smile spread out on his face, showing his dimples. You're moving in with me. I nodded and laughed as he swept me up into his arms and started peppering my faces with kisses. Gracie, you own my heart, you know that. 27, Gray. Like a complete creep, I watched my mate as she slept. She had insisted on sleeping in a guest room. I chuckled, remembering how she had argued that this was different when I reminded her that I'd slept in her bed with her more than once. She claimed that people would talk if she stayed in my room. Not that I gave a shit what anybody thought, but I didn't want her to be upset, so I agreed and put her in the room right next to mine. She wiggled her nose in her sleep before changing positions and facing away from me. I still couldn't believe that she was here. My mate's in my house. Gracie is the room next to mine. I knew something must have happened with her parents to make her change her mind, but she looked really exhausted the night before, so I didn't ask her about it. She stirred a bit before her eyes finally opened. I watched her eyes widen as her face went from fear to confused, before she remembered where she was and how she got there, and she relaxed and sank back into her pillows. She lay there for a few minutes before sluggishly pulling herself up from the bed. Her eyes scanned the room and then she jumped when they settled on me. Gray? My goodness, you scared me. I smiled, she was so cute. I got up and walked over to her to wrap my hands around her waist. Good afternoon, baby. She tried to stay mad at me, but her expression faltered and a smile crept onto her face. Wait, what? She pulled away. Did you just say afternoon? Yep, I checked my watch. 1:04 what? I've never slept this late in my life. Today's a school day. Why didn't you wake me? Oh my God. She gripped her hair as she ran around the room. I watched her for a bit before deciding to let her out of her misery. Relax, you won't get in trouble. She came to a stop in front of me. What do you mean? Why won't I? Because the principal is in my pack and I'll rip off his head if he so much as gives you a warning. But I thought it smart not to say that out loud. I called in and said you were sick. Besides, we're at the end of the term, not much work is being done anyway. I've never missed a day of school in my life. I smiled, wrapping my arms around her waist again, but you're forgetting the one good thing about today. She furrowed her brows. What? You get to spend it with me. She looked at me doubtfully and I teased, your very handsome boyfriend wants to spend the whole day with you, and you're not even grateful. What has this world come to? She stuck her tongue out at me. You're the lucky one, getting to spend time with me. You're right, I'm extremely lucky. I leaned down and pressed a small kiss to her lips. Now will you go and get ready? Her cheeks were pink as she went into the adjoining bathroom and I laughed. She was so damn cute. Gracie. We finally arrived at the crowded mall after an hour on the road. I looked at Gray in the driver's seat as he tried to find a parking spot and smiled. I can't believe he brought me all the way to Marston just to watch a movie. Marston was the next town over and considerably bigger than ours in terms of population, size, everything. In Valley Hill, we had just one old movie theater that showed movies 2 months or more after they premiered, which was exactly why Gray had brought us here, to see a movie. He finally found somewhere to park and came around to open my door. I got out and he grabbed my hand immediately before pressing the button on his key to lock the car. What movie do you want to see? He asked as we walked into the mall, his arm now around my shoulders. I shrugged. I don't really know. I haven't been to a cinema in years. I've only been one other time. His jaw hardened a bit at that before relaxing. Okay, come on, I'll choose. We ended up seeing some action movie, which I didn't find very interesting because, honestly, who enjoys violence? After the movie, we got some ice cream cones and strolled through the mall eating them. For the first time in my life, I felt normal like the other teenagers. I was walking through a mall, holding hands with my boyfriend after seeing a movie. It wasn't something I'd ever seen myself doing. How can black be your favorite color? I laughed at him. Okay, it might be brown because your eyes are extremely pretty. I laughed, shoving him a little so I stopped as I spotted an arcade. Let's go there. I didn't wait for an answer, as I began to pull Gray towards the doors of the arcade. I'd always wanted to go to one of these places. We got coins from the person at the entrance and proceeded into the maze of game machines. Well, what do you want to play? He asked me and I suddenly felt very intimidated. There were so many options. My face must have expressed that because Gray chuckled and pulled me to the basketball machine. Let's just play this, yeah. The hoop at the top of the machine kept moving horizontally, back and forth, and you had to try to throw as many balls in as possible. We finished our cones first before turning to the machine, ready to lose Brewer. I think you should be scared, finally. We fed the coins in the and hoop started moving. I started throwing the balls as quickly as I could, shoving Gray so that he'd lose his balance. At the end, I won with 38 balls to Gray's 35. Yes! I screamed and danced around. I really hadn't thought I'd win. You lose, Brewer. He looked angrily at the machine as if it was its fault. It's not fair. I looked at the time on my phone. It was past 5 and I still needed to go and pick up the rest of my stuff from my house like I'd told my parents I would. Ugh, what a horrible way to end such a perfect day. Gray, it's getting late. We should get going. I have to stop at my house. He frowned. Why? I explained to him what had happened yesterday night, and why I had to go back while we walked to the car. He was breathing hard when I finished. Your father hit you. Calm down, I smiled at him. It's never happened before. It's going to be really hard for me not to hurt him in every way possible, Gracie. He grit his teeth. Well, you better try. I leaned up and kissed him, and he instantly relaxed. Let's go. 28, Gracie. Wait in the car, please. We were parked in front of my house, with me leaning down to the car level to talk to Gray. He didn't look happy about that but nodded. I sighed and faced the house. I needed to do this on my own. I walked up to the door and knocked. Soon after, the door swung open. Well, Esther, come and see who came crawling back. My father stood tall, still in his work clothes. Sorry to disappoint, Father, but I'm not back. I just came to get the rest of my stuff like I said I'd do. I slid past his large frame and into the house. Tamara Grace, my mum, had just walked out of the kitchen. I ignored her and went up the stairs to my room, stopping by my parents' room to pick a few moving boxes. I slowly started piling my stuff into the boxes: books, a few clothes. When I was done, I stood back and looked at the bare yellow walls of the room. I had really thought this would be the town we would settle in. I sighed and picked up a box, only to drop it when I turned and found my dad watching me. Dad. I bent down and picked the box again, with him still just standing there, not saying anything. Excuse me. He was blocking the door. His arm was just a blur until he hit my face and I was on the floor. Spare the rod and spoil the child, he spat. I should have listened, Dad. Look, Jay, shut up. Did you really think I was going to let you go off the rail? The path to the Lord. Do you know what happened to Eli in the Bible? I did. Eli was a priest who was holy and good, but was damned by God because his children were bad and he didn't correct them. How is it that there's a Bible verse for everything? Dad, I'm sorry. But please, tears were streaming down my face. Shut up. He came towards me, his hand raised again only to be thrown back suddenly. Gray was there, breathing hard, his eyes dark, and it might have just been my tears, but I could swear he had claws. He looked at me momentarily before facing my father, who was now lying on the floor, clutching his neck. He stood over him and I immediately knew what he was going to do. I pushed myself off the floor. Gray, no please. His head snapped to me and I touched his arm, please. He kept his eyes fixed on mine and slowly they returned to their normal gray color. Which is your most important box? He asked me and I pointed at the box that held my books and he nodded and picked it up. We'll replace everything else, let's go. Tamara Grace, you have really chosen ruin. You will live to regret this. And you, my father looked at Gray, do you really think I'm going to let you take my underage daughter? We were already at the door and Gray hardly spared him a glance when he said, I'd like to see you try to stop me. My mother was standing near the door, and she nearly shrank into the wall when Gray and I walked by her. When we got outside, it was dark. We had spent quite a while here. Gray put the box in the back seat, and we both got into the car. He gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought he would break it. Are you okay? He asked without looking at me. Yes, I was. My face hurt a bit, but I was fine. I shouldn't have fucking let you go in there by yourself. Gray, calm down, it wasn't your fault. I put my hand on his arm. I would have killed him. Anybody else's red water Y heart would be in my hands right now. I couldn't help but laugh. Call me crazy, but I found it a bit comical, how he was growling and gripping the steering wheel, and talking about ripping my father's heart out. He looked at me, frowning as my laughter filled the car. I kept laughing until his face lightened and a small smile even flit over his lips. You're special, you know that, Gracie. I smiled and leaned up to kiss him. I know. The next day, I made sure I woke up early and after having my bath and everything, went downstairs to look for some food. I am considered stopping by Gray's room and waking him up, or something, but quickly thrashed the idea. I found my way to the kitchen, which was empty, but in the adjoining dining room, I could see plates piled high with bacon, pancakes, a large jug of orange juice, eggs and I think bread on the table. Who eats this much? I shrugged and grabbed a plate, and put some food onto it before seating at the table. I wondered how I was going to get to school, or how long it would take to get to school from here. Gray lived pretty far out. I looked around the dining room. Everything the house seemed like they had seen a lot inside these walls. They seemed hundreds of years old, but somehow, they didn't look it. I really don't know how to explain it. And it was extremely large, made me wonder how many people were in his pack. I heard the voices before I saw the faces, and they smelt me before they saw me. Grace balls. Ryan's voice was loud as he came rushing towards me and physically lifting me up from my chair in a hug. You're here. How are you here? Before giving me a chance to answer, he turned to Mason and rolled his eyes. We go out of town for a few days and all the drama happens. Hands off my mate Ackerson, no. This is what you get for not updating me while I was away. Ryan hugged me harder, while sticking his tongue out at Gray. Soon you'll have no arms, Ackerson, Gray sang, as he removed me from Ryan's arms and pulled me into his. Morning, baby, he smiled his dimpled smile and captured my lips in his. Okay, I definitely wouldn't mind waking up to this for a long while. 29, Gracie. So you're living with him now? Scott had been weird all morning since I told him I'd moved in with Gray, and that was part of the reasons I was absent the day before. Yes, I said through my teeth, glaring at him to shut up. I had a hard enough time in chemistry without having him distracting me. The door to the class opened and in walked the short, stocky principal. Mr. Radcliffe. What brings you here? The chemistry teacher exclaimed. He looked around the class. Mrs. Woodworth, please excuse Miss. Finally he looked at me. Some people are here for her. My head shot me. Back up. Did he just say? I looked around and everybody's eyes were on me, the principal waiting at the door. "Who's looking for you?" Scott whispered. I shrugged as I hastily stuffed my book into my bag. "I have no idea." I got up and followed the principal out of the classroom and down the hall. He didn't speak to me or even look at me. Who is looking for me, sir?" He didn't answer as he strode ahead. Dang, how did such a short man walk so fast? We finally got to his office and walked in. I stopped at the door once I saw who was inside. Both my parents were seated in front of the principal's desk, and there were 2 other men in police uniforms in the office. "Come in, miss," said one of the officers before turning to my parents. "Is this your daughter?" I slowly walked in and shut the door behind me, my heart thumping. My father looked at me, a sneer on his face. "It's her." The officer nodded. "And what is the name of the man who kidnapped her?" "He didn't kidnap me." I spoke for the first time since I had entered the room. They ignored me. "She called him some stupid color." "Gray, was it?" Both officers and the principal's heads shot up and their eyes widened. "Gray?" One of the officers echoed. As if he heard his name, the door burst open and it was Gray. "What's going on here?" The principal, who had been lounging on his chair and looking bored, stood up suddenly, upsetting most of what was on his desk. Gray looked around the room, his mouth in a tight, thin line before directing at the policeman. "And Radcliffe, may I talk to you outside?" They all nodded and followed Gray out of the room. I was left alone with my parents and the silence could kill. "Well, your little boyfriend will be spending the night in jail and you," my father grinned, "will be coming home with us." "No." Gray was 18, his birthday had been at the beginning of September, before we met. That means if my parents accused him of kidnapping me, he would be treated as an adult. "Mum," my mother had not looked at me since I entered the room. "Please, do something. You know he didn't kidnap me." She still refused to look at me. Well, they were dumb if they thought I was going to let Gray go to jail without doing something. I had begun to form a plan in my mind when the door opened and Gray said, "Gracie, let's go." "What?" My father and I said in unison, him rising out of his chair. Gray ignored him and took my hand. "Come on." My father pulled my hand out of Gray's. "Where do you think you're taking my daughter? You don't seem to realize the amount of trouble you're in, young man." He looked at the policemen. "What are you waiting for? Arrest him." "I'm sorry, but we can't do that, sir," Officer 1 said, "but you will have to come down to the station with us for false accusations." Gray took my hand again. "Come on." This time I went with him. Scott pushed himself off the wall he had been leaning on when we came out. "Are you okay? What happened?" He sounded concerned. I smiled. "I'm fine. Don't worry." Gray left my hand and instead wrapped his arms around my shoulder, and even without looking at him, I knew he was glaring at Scott. "Let's go," Gray said. "Do you want to be here when he comes out?" He was referring to my father and I shuddered. I definitely did not. 30, Gracie. "So you guys don't celebrate Christmas?" The 3 boys shook their heads, looking at me warily. "Like, at all?" I was aghast. "No presents, no carols, no tree, nothing." Gray chuckled. "Gracie, calm down. No. How do you not celebrate Christmas?" Christmas was my favorite holiday, and also the time I love my family the most. We always had hot cocoa around the tree, while long time ago in Bethlehem played in the background, and we also had all sorts of games. It really was the most wonderful time of the year. "I don't know, we just never have." Gray shrugged. "Okay, well you are this year. How many people live at your house?" He squinted as he thought. No, 6. The mental calculations I'd been making stopped. I'd been expecting a lot more. "What about the rest of the pack?" "Well, our house is the main pack house and only the Alpha, Beta, and Gamma's family is allowed to live there. The rest of the pack live in a bigger pack house not far from ours," he explained. "So right now, it's just me. these two and Mason's sister, my mum, and of course, you. His mum, I still hadn't met her, and I didn't know how to feel about that. Mason has a sister. Mace grimaced. Yeah, Lana, I'd never heard him speak about her before. Do you think people would mind if we had a Christmas dinner this year? I bit my lip. I didn't want to step on any toes. Gray wrapped his arms around my waist. Gracie, you're their Luna. They'll have to dance in fire if you want them to. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I fished it out. It was from Scott. How do you want to do our assignment? Assignment? I looked around the cafeteria, and spotted him sitting near the back with Kira. I texted back, what assignment? His reply was almost instantaneous, forgot you missed class. Chemistry. We have a project to submit next week and you're my partner. Fudge. Fudge fudge fudge. This was going to be difficult. Not because it was chemistry, although that was a major problem, but because Scott and I would have to work together, and Gray didn't like Scott. Plus I lived with Gray now and went to and fro school with him. Which already ruled out Scott and I meeting up after school because I didn't want Gray to be stuck waiting for me. That left only lunchtime to meet. I looked at my watch. We had 25 minutes left for lunch. We could at least get started. Let's meet in the library. I began packing up my stuff. Gray, I have to go and get started on my chemistry project. He didn't miss a beat. Who's it with? I stood up and slung my bag over my shoulder. Scott. At his name, all three wolves growled and Gray shot up. No, he stopped at my squinted eyes. I mean, I really don't want you to be alone with that guy Gracie. Well, I have to work with him or I fail, so. I'll come with you. He began packing his stuff too. Gray? No. It's either I come with you each time, or I have a word with you, chemistry teacher. You can't behave like this each time. I have to work with a boy. I don't. It's just this boy. I huffed, knowing he wasn't going to leave it. Fine. He smiled, the smile of somebody used to always getting what he wants. I looked at where Scott had been, but he had already left for the library. We got to the library doors and I pushed them open, going in first. Scott spotted me immediately, waving and smiling, but his smile dropped when Gray came in behind me. Gray grabbed my hand as we made our way towards him. He's staying. Scott nodded to Gray. Apparently, I said under my breath. I sat down opposite Scott, and as Gray made to sit next to me, I glared at him. He rolled his eyes and went and sat at the table behind us. Scott glared at the back of Gray's head until I cleared my throat. Should we start? Gray? I watched Gracie and Scott from my seat behind them like I had done for the past few days that they'd been working together. My jaw hardened when I looked at him and relaxed the moment my eyes touched her. It was a stressful process. It annoyed me that I still couldn't find anything wrong with this Scott guy. We had done all sorts of research on him, and knew everything about him from where he was born to his least ice cream flavor. But my wolf still don't trust him. And my wolf was never wrong. Animals have the best instincts, wolves especially. I didn't like him being on my territory, and I really didn't like this new bond he was forming with my mate. I was too busy for this shit. We were still on the trail of this chosen one, and we had even started getting letters from him now, dropped right at my doorstep. You couldn't get within 10 miles of my fucking driveway without the guards knowing, not to talk of getting to my doorstep. Consistently. Which meant there was somebody on the inside. It pained me to think that one of my wolves was literally a dead wolf walking, but if that was how it had to be, so be it. I watched as Gracie laughed at something and I grimaced. What was there to laugh about in chemistry? I focused on Scott again. He wasn't human. He smelled like something that was trying really hard to take on a human scent, and to any ordinary wolf, it would have worked. But I knew. I didn't know what creature he was. But I was definitely going to find out. And when I did, boy, was somebody going to have his heart shredded. 31. Gracie. Hess law states that if a reaction can be carried out in a series of steps, the sum of the enthalpies for each step should equal the enthalpy change for the total reaction. This statement emphasizes the conservation not only of matter, but also of energy. Scott read aloud for the 5th time, but it didn't make any more sense to me than it did the first time. None. Fruits. Just one more time, I promise. He took a deep breath and read it again. Nope. He glared at me. It's not my fault. Why do we have to do this exact topic anyway? Our project has to be on thermochemistry. Hess' law relates directly to that. Even though his words were filled with frustration, he seemed to be finding the whole thing amusing. I heard the bell go and I sighed in relief, saved by the bell. CYA Scotty. I grinned as I grabbed my stuff. I'd hardly stood up when I felt Gray at my side. Scott ignored him. When are we studying again? This thing's due Tuesday. Fudge, it was Thursday. We'll spend the entire weekend studying, I promise. It was late when we got to Gray's house, not having anything to do with the ice cream cones I stopped to get. I'll be right back. I want to check on my mum. Gray kissed the side of my head before disappearing up the stairs. His mum spent all her time in her room, a room that I had no idea of its location. I found it weird, but then I was in a werewolf pack house. Deciding that I wanted some Oreos, I found my way to the kitchen. I stopped when I noticed somebody already there. Her back was to me, but she turned around immediately, sniffing until she spotted me. Hi. Her waist-length red hair bounced as she waved. She was definitely younger than me by 3, 4 years tops. Hi. I cautiously stepped in the kitchen. The werewolves I'd met so far either went from cold to hot pretty quickly, and I didn't plan to anger one. I'm Tamara G. Grace, yeah, I know. I'm Lana. She smiled widely, the little crevices between each tooth black with specks of cream. Some expression must have come up on my face, because she wiped her grin and covered her mouth with her hand. Oops, I just stole some Oreos. Her voice was muffled by her hand, but I definitely heard the sentence. That explained her teeth. I grinned. I definitely liked her. Could I get in on that? That's how Gray found us, hunched over the counter, our mouths stuffed. Lana had sniffed him coming, and we had hastily shoved the box into the cabinet, but we couldn't chew and swallow fast enough. 5 minutes and you're already corrupted. Are you that easy finally? He teased. Fut you be. My words were intelligible, and I sprayed some of the black gunk on him and the counter, at which point Lana started laughing, trying to swallow her Oreos, which got me laughing too. Gray grabbed us both napkins just in time, as we emptied our mouths into them, doubling up with laughter. You spray, Lana would start before dissolving in another fit of laughter. And then why, I would continue. Then finally, the laughing died down and we both drank a lot of water. Gray spent the entire time staring at us, his eyes dancing in amusement. Is this going to be a regular thing? Because a man needs more time to prepare for something like that. And very maturely, I stuck my tongue out at him. Oreos? Really, guys? Oreos? Why, oh. You're Mason's sister. It just clicked. She nodded, smiling. Honestly, I should have known. Even if Mason hadn't just told me her name earlier that day, the matching red hair should have given me a clue. Anyway, ignoring the Oreos hater, Lana rolled her eyes. Wanna come up to my room? My shoulders sagged. Can't. I have so much schoolwork to catch up on, you would hardly believe. All the days I'd been strung up on Gray and our breakup, combined with the days I'd skipped school, really added up. We went up the stairs and Lana said her goodbyes before disappearing down a hall. Gray and I headed to our hallway and I stopped at my door. You're kidding? His eyes widened. I smiled. Nope, you're really going to be sleeping in this room? Yep, I wiggled my fingers and shut my door behind me. He stood there for a few more minutes before I heard his footsteps receding. The door to his room next to mine opened and shut. I sighed and got out my books and started working on my essay for English. Trying to forget about the boy next door. 32, Gracie. So that makes sense to you? Scott asked. So it doesn't. It does, I think. Let's just do a final revision tomorrow. To be honest, Scott was a really good teacher, and I really did think I had gotten it, but I'd never gotten anything in chemistry that fast, so yeah. I wasn't sure. Okay, he closed the books that we had spent all day studying. We had chosen a booth in the very back of Joe's to avoid distractions while we studied, and it had worked. I had no idea what the time was because my phone was dead and I couldn't see the diner clock from where I was. When I returned from trying to peer out of the booth and see the clock, I found that I was suddenly closer to Scott, very close. His eyes were dark and I immediately jumped back. As though the action startled him, he shook his head and his eyes went back to normal. I should get going. I'm very tired. He rubbed a hand over his face. I nodded mutely and stood up to let him get out of the booth. What the hell was that? He stopped as he got out. It's evening, do you want me to give you a ride? Gray was supposed to pick me up, no thanks. I'll just wait. He nodded, and avoiding my eyes, left the diner. I stood there for a few more minutes before deciding to move to the counter, where it was closer to the clock, and I would be able to see Gray when he arrived. I picked up my bag and made my way to a stool at the counter. The diner was nearly empty, with just a few people scattered around. As I sat down, I could finally see the clock. 6:02. I turned around on my stool to face the diner, and people watched since my phone was dead, and I had no other form of entertainment. People watching was one of my more favorite things to do. I tried to imagine what kind of life each person lived, what had brought them here, and if they were brooding, what they were thinking about. Okay, first subject, the old lady at the far left. Maybe around 85. Lonely, all her children, if she had any, had moved out of this town first chance they'd had, widowed early. I realized that, like me, she was people watching. And at the moment, she was doing the hooded man by the window. I shifted my attention to him too and immediately started. His hood was so low that I couldn't see his eyes, but it couldn't be mistaken who he was staring at. Was he people watching too? Was that why he was staring so intently at me? When he realized I was looking at him, he immediately dropped his gaze. Who was that? I was distracted by the bell as somebody walked into the diner. My shoulders sank as I realized that it wasn't Gray. But it was a man. A man whose eyes very subtly flicked to me immediately he walked in. He walked and sat down on the stool right next to mine. And I don't know whether it was because I had been living with werewolves for a while, or because I'd been hanging out with them even longer, but I noticed he smelt like Scott. And the one thing Gray kept repeating about Scott was he doesn't smell human. Did this man also not smell human? Whether he did or didn't, I needed to get out of there. I got up very slowly, as if that would make me invisible, and slowly made my way to the door. I cursed the loud bell that alerted even people 3 blocks away of my exit. It was dusk and the only thing still lighting up the sky was the sun setting somewhere behind the diner. I decided I would just head in the direction of Gray's house, hoping I would meet him on the way, because there was no way I would be able to find the house on my own despite having lived there for about a week now. Gray had told me the house was designed to be difficult even for other werewolves to find. Suddenly, my ears picked up the tiniest sound. I was being followed. I didn't dare look back, I just walked faster. The person behind me didn't seem too worried about catching up to me, as they didn't walk any faster. Was I overreacting? Where in the world was Gray? Excuse me, the man behind me called out. Certainly not overreacting. I broke into a light jog. "Excuse me," he called again. I still didn't stop. Saying I was terrified would be the understatement of the century. Then a hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Tamara Grace. Don't you know it's rude to ignore people?" I didn't know how he has caught up to me so quickly. His voice was sickly sweet. His grip was tight. Nevertheless, I reached up and tried to pry his fingers off, which was surprisingly easy. He didn't try to stop me, and as I looked forward again, I realized why. There were 3 other men around me. I had nowhere to run. "This is her." "Really?" one of them asked. "Yes," the one that had caught me snapped. "Now, Tamara Grace, there's somebody who's been waiting rather anxiously to get you." One of the other men put a glove on his hand before taking what seemed like a handkerchief out of his pocket. Only that I knew it wasn't just a handkerchief. I could smell the chloroform from where I was. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.